Prepare yourself for a bumpy ride. Yes.
Okay, go.
The victims. Eleanor R. Mills, 34 years old, wife of the church sexton, having an affair with Reverend Edward Wheeler Hall, singer in the church choir. Reverend Edward Wheeler Hall, 41 years old, rector of Episcopal Church of St. John the Evangelist in New Brunswick, left home at about 7:30 Thursday night to meet with Eleanor to discuss the doctor's bill. And he didn't come home that night.
Crime scene. Found by Raymond Schneider and Pearl Balmer on September 16, 1922. In a crab apple orchard on DeRussey's Lane in the outskirts of New Brunswick. One reverend, 1 bullet to the head. Eleanor, 3 bullets to the head. Throat savagely ripped open. Tongue cut out. Love letters shredded and scattered around. 1 reverend's calling card sticking up in the grass. 3 extended .32 caliber bullet shells. 3-foot-long iron bar. 2 handkerchiefs with the letter H. Feet both pointing towards the crabapple tree. Laid out with her head on his arm, her hand on his knee. She was wearing a bloody scarf. He had his hat covering his face. Estimated time of death, 36 hours before they were found. Strange that no one would find them on a lover's lane on a busy Friday night. So it's assumed people found them and didn't report and or rob the victims. Evidence tampered with.
The case. Case took place on November 27, 1922. The grand jury deliberated for 18 hours and refused to hand down an indictment. 4-ish years later, the story was resurrected in newspapers. They went back to trial on November 3rd, 1926, which is 4 years later. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and decided all suspects were not guilty. Police took no initiative to safeguard the scene for evidence. Clothing wasn't examined for fingerprints, no coroner's inquest. Material witnesses who presented themselves had been rejected. In some stories, the witnesses had been bullied into changing their stories. Officers who seemed enthusiastic were taken off the case. Some clues were not followed up, inadequate autopsies, evidence was not carefully prepared or convincingly presented. And important papers, which were original statements and affidavits of witnesses, original grand jury minutes, went missing. Vital exhibits still in possession of the state showed evidence of having been tampered with. Some believed Hall and her wealthy family bought off the investigation. So this entire thing was a little ridiculous.
Very unofficial.
Very unofficial, and just not well organized.
Mrs. Hall. She called the police after Edward never came home, just to see if any accidents had been reported, but didn't give her name. A private watchman reported seeing a woman enter the Hall house at 3 o'clock Friday morning. She woke up her brother William at 2:30 Friday morning and went to the church to look for Edward, and also went to Mrs. Mills' house, but no lights were on, so they went home. She asked Mr. Mills about it the next morning, and was also reported to have told him that they must be dead, when he said that he didn't know where they were either. She went to Italy to recover for a year, but then tried to put the past behind her. 4 years after the murder, Arthur Reel and Louise Geis go for an annulment because Louise had a sexual affair with Reverend Hall. Mrs. Hall paid her $5,000 to not tell anyone what she knew of the murders. Witnesses poked holes in her alibis. Also, her 2 brothers were pretty sketchy. Her brother Willie was slightly feeble-minded. He lived with the Halls, owned a .32 caliber revolver, but it was filed down so it couldn't shoot, most likely an automatic in the murders. Her brother Henry lived 50 miles away, was a shotgun marksman, and claimed to be fishing that night.
It was another possibility that Mrs. Hall and her brother Willie committed the murder together. The theory is that Willie killed the 2, and he didn't really know what he was doing. The rage took him over, and he was out of control. He was agitated the next morning and kept repeating that something terrible had happened the previous night. His friends at the fire station seemed to think that he knew about the murders before the bodies were found. The Pig Woman, also known as the Pig Lady, but officially known as Jane Gibson, who was 50 years old when this took place. She worked on a 60-acre farm near the murder scene, and she fattened pigs for a living. It's pretty solid living, I'm not gonna lie to you. Her story is, on the night of the murder, she chased a thief who had been raiding her corn patch, so she jumped on her mule, whose name was Jenny, and when she reached the crabapple orchard, she saw and heard 3 men and 2 women in a furious argument. There was a parked car. She got off her mule and approached the scene, but heard a shot, so she ran back to the mule. Heard 3 more shots and a woman scream, "Oh my!" and another woman scream, "Oh Henry!" Witnesses corroborated her stories. She was dying of cancer by the second trial, which was on November 6th, 1926. And so she went to court in a hospital bed, which is pretty intense. Her story expanded, including new dialogue, but she couldn't explain what she hadn't originally remembered. So her story kept changing, and then she was dying. So the pig woman was not a very valid source. It's a little crazy.
One of the other main suspects was Mr. Mills, Eleanor's husband. When Mrs. Hall asked him about where Edward might be, he said he knew nothing and that Eleanor had never come home either. He claims to have known about his wife's affair with Hall, but, you know, who knows? He left his house around 10:30 the night Eleanor went missing to look for her, and the time of death was roughly around 10. So, you know, pretty sketchy. But he was never thoroughly pursued as a suspect. Another problem with the case with its many inaccuracies.
Ready? Okay. Ray Schneider was the one who found the 2 dead, so he's pretty important. He is said to have been seen with his friend, who had a gun, that night. Apparently he saw his girlfriend Pearl and another man walking. Possibly, he thought that the Reverend and Eleanor were Pearl and the other man, and shot them. It wouldn't account for the torn-up letter and personal killing of Eleanor. Also, the couple was thought to be shot at close range. Ray wasn't that close to Pearl. Another suspect, which is pretty random, and I would not have guessed this, but it's the KKK, also known as the Ku Klux Klan. And they were a suspect because people thought that they were punishing immorality because of the affair.
Some people think that it might have been a random robbery to steal the victim's money and jewelry.
One possibility was that it was a rival of Eleanor Mills, who was jealous of her affair with the Reverend.
Dude, that was so sketchy.
Everything in the Hall Mills murder is so inaccurate.
I know, like,
Nothing makes sense. It's such a lie.
Right?
Who did it?
I have no idea.
I have no idea.
Oh.
Alright, so wait. Who did it then?
It was so long ago. How do we figure this out?
So weird. I thought.
Who did it?
I can't.
Who did it? So nobody ever decided who did it. All the suspects had their reasons to be guilty, and some of their alibis were okay, some were dumb. And so nobody knew who it was, and now it's too late to go back and look at it because not enough evidence was found. Everyone's dead now. So it looks like this case will always remain open.
No,
not closed. Case open forever.
I don't want to hear it.
Don't start the take!
Thank you. This project's gonna blow. I love it. I love it.
This project doesn't blow. Don't listen to Jess. Don't listen. Don't listen.
You're not filming that.
Okay. I am.
You can't say that.
I'll cut it out. I'll cut it out. Okay. Who done it?
We don't know.
Very unofficial and just not well organized. Miss Blackwell would be very upset by this. So, I don't know. It's a suspect. Whoa. So that's pretty crazy. That's just going big picture. Totally intense with the suspect, but that's one of them.
Yeah. Forever.